Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for today's industry webinar. My name is Kelly Barner. I'm the head of content and operations here at Art of Procurement, and I'm glad you've decided to join us for today's event. So our focus, we have a little bit of drama today. We're focusing on the tragic mislabeling of procurement, thinking about going from sourcing to problem solving. Now, we're going to get into a number of discussions today, focusing on proactive value creation, real-time optimization, and of course, not only growing each company's value proposition, but solidifying the connection between their ability to do that and the value that procurement brings. I'm going to bring my guest on in just a moment, but a couple of quick housekeeping things before we do that. If you look at your screen, you'll see up the right-hand side, there's a nice big chat bar. We've got a welcome message in there. Please use that liberally during today's session. You can put in comments, you can put in questions. I'll be keeping an eye on that as we go. I can pause periodically, and of course, we'll save a little bit of time at the end. Let me tell you a bit about my guest. Ander Tallett is the Chief Strategy Officer at Science Exchange, and he has significant strategy experience in life sciences procurement, as well as experience in enterprise systems. So looking forward to today's conversation. Without further delay, let me go ahead and bring in Ander Tallett.
Hi, Kelly.
Hi, Andrew. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Sure, no problem. Excited.
Now, we have a tradition here at Art of Procurement. We always start by asking this question. Did
Okay.
you find procurement, or did procurement find you?
Procurement found me, through the pathway of enterprise systems. So I was the ERP and P2P guy, and then I ended up directly taking over procurement. It found me. That was the way around.
Well, you're certainly in good company. It found most of us. I think it's very rare cases where people sought out careers in procurement. Before we get into the bulk of the conversation, I love the fact that we have sort of a dramatic, mysterious title for today's event. So we're talking about procurement being mislabeled. Sometimes we might talk about it as misbranded or having perception issues. But let me start by sort of getting your thoughts around why we picked this topic. What's your perspective on how procurement has been mislabeled?
Yeah, it's really important. That's why I love the topic for today. I think it's mislabeled because when we think about solving problems, that's really procurement's job, right? It's really the way that we add value to the business, accretive to the business value overall. And yet the label procurement, even sourcing, really sort of puts in the bucket of how do we help you buy stuff,
Yeah.
right? And like that's a much more limited view of the world. And honestly, it's not really what we do. What we do is how do we help solve problems? And one of those might be, hey, I need to buy something. And then who do I buy it from? And how do I get the best price and manage that relationship and all the things that we do in procurement and sourcing. But ultimately, what we're really thinking about is how do we solve this problem for the business? And that's quite a different conversation. And that's what I was excited about today.
Yeah. Now, that mislabeling could be frustrating. It could be annoying, but we're actually going so far as to call it tragic, suggesting that it's sort of a limiting factor, not just for procurement, but for the company as a whole. Why do you think this mislabeling rises to the level of tragic?
Sure. I think it's very structural to how businesses will operate over the next 10 years, right? When we think about how companies are going to restructure themselves, and believe me, they're already doing this. We're already taking the opportunity of anytime you see any kind of downturn in the economy or any kind of big structural shift like we're seeing in AI today, companies take a pause and think about, hey, what do we want to be? What does the future look like for us? And any CEO that I talk to is having this conversation today.
Yeah.
Where do we add value in the value chain? What are we really good at? And the reason I think it's tragic that procurement hasn't traditionally been sort of at the core of that conversation or very central to that conversation is because a lot of that conversation, when we look forward, is going to be about the concepts of procurement and sourcing. Where do we find the right people to do the right things or the right services internally or externally in order to add value? And especially within life sciences, this is going to be a huge conversation. Do we need to do this in-house? Do we need to do it externally? Who do we do it with externally? This isn't a sort of transactional conversation anymore. This is a structural conversation about how do you literally run and build a company. That is the level at which we're talking about sort of what the future holds, and why I think that conversation needs to happen, right? The conversation needs to happen of, hey, procurement is not in the box of we help you buy the thing you already need, you already know you need, but hey, we help you change how we operate as a business, right? And I think it's sort of similar to the transition that happened between IT and digital over the last 20, 30 years. When you look back 20, 30 years ago, you had the joke, the IT guy, right? Who was the IT guy? The person who helped you with your laptop and made sure that you're, maybe
Reset your password.
Reset your password, right? What's IT today? Literally core to any business, every business is a digital company, right? It would be silly today to say, hey, my company doesn't run on technology. Of course it does. And anyone who's thinking about the future is thinking about it through the lens of technology and digital. I think we need to think the same way about procurement. What makes the next 20 years, next 10 years, next 5 years so different than where it's been in the past, in particular in life sciences? I think we're going to see something very different from what we saw historically.
And I think that gives us a great place to jump into the core of today's conversation, because what you're really talking about, you're talking about the structural frameworks that define the role that procurement will play and the opportunities that we get to create value. But you're also looking down the road and thinking about the whole company's strategic approach. When you and I spoke last week in preparation for this session, you had talked about some recent research and some information about the increasing cost of drug delivery, and so therefore how that's going to impact the role of procurement. I think it's a great sort of stage setting context providing bit of information. Do you want to share some of that study as sort of the lead into today's conversation?
Yeah, and I gave a talk at a clinical conference last year, and I cited a very wide, many people have cited it. This was a very widely cited study from 2013 out of Tufts, which pegged the cost of developing a new drug at $2.8 billion, which was a huge increase. Go back in time, sort of 1 billion was thrown around a lot. Then it went up to sort of this 2.8 number, got used a lot for the last 10 years. And a new group called researchers called the St. Gallen Consortium pulled together and came out with new research, which is really a top-down analysis of big pharma spend, which came out with a number well over 6 billion to bring a new drug to market. That's a staggering number. It's a staggering number, and it creates a fundamental problem, right? It creates a fundamental problem, which is every drug has to be a blockbuster. And that's an issue, right? And if you think about it, sort of, okay, let's think about that literally in terms of movies, right? If you think about it in terms of movies, I mean that every single movie has to be, Marvel Cinematic Universe, which it does feel like that at times. It really does, but it isn't, right? If I want to do something quiet and Netflix and chill and want to watch a home, building show, it exists. And actually that long tail problem exists for us in drug discovery and drug development, which is if it costs $6 billion to bring a drug to market, we're all chasing PD-1 inhibitors and other oncology drugs. And we can't really bring to market that sort of long tail. And granted, that number is an average, and certainly rare disease, ultra rare disease, you're going to see different numbers. But yeah, that's a problem. It's a real problem because it creates, there's unmet need for patients. Patients are waiting. We need to do a better job bringing drugs to market across that entire spectrum, not just the fat head, but also the long tail. And that's an issue. That's an issue that's created literally by cost, and something that we can directly impact in sourcing and procurement.
Which is an enormous problem, but it also creates a huge opportunity for procurement teams in these life science companies to step up and make a difference. So I'm imagining, Andrew, that a lot of the people that are with us live today who will listen later on demand are nodding their heads as we're talking about procurement sort of being mislabeled, especially internally. If we have people with us that are already saying, yes, I'm in that bucket, the beginning of the change process has to start with us. What's your initial advice if you have people that are already identifying with the fact that they're struggling to overcome this problem?
Yeah, there is a structural issue here, right? Which is, and I'll sort of use that IT analogy again, right? IT analogy. How did we get out of the world of saying IT is the team that helps us with our laptops and helps us with our network? And that's because IT started becoming strategic, value added to the business, accretive to the business value. I think we need that same conversation in sourcing and procurement. There's always been an element there, right? That's always been there, possibly even more than there used to be for IT. There always been an element there of sort of the strategic component, especially key relationships, preferreds, more about who do we work with. That's been a big part of the conversation. And there's corp dev elements there. There's other pieces tied into that. But there's a lot when I look forward about how do we get this conversation going, which is, well, this is actually a pretty tactical operational change, right? It's like, how do we actually think about ourselves? And then how do we think about solving some of these problems within the business? And I'll add my favorite analogy, which is, if you think about it like a homeowner, right? And most of us have sort of dealt with this. My grass is getting long in the summer. The traditional view of sort of the procurement sourcing world would be, okay, well, I'm going to help you get a good discount on a lawnmower. Well, that's not really what I'm asking, right? I'm not really saying like, hey, I need to go buy a lawnmower right now. What I'm actually saying is my grass is getting long. I need to mow it. So do I mow it? Does somebody else mow it? Should I do it myself? Right. And if I do want to mow it, do I want to go buy a mower? What kind of mower? All right. Well, that's more, now we're back into the sort of that traditional world of procurement and sourcing. But what we're not doing up front is that more of that orchestration layer. Who should I work with? Should I do this myself? Am I good at this or am I not good at it? Right. And I'll say, like, for me, I'm a car guy. I grew up as a car guy. I did a lot of work on cars, especially through my 20s, had a lot of fun. Don't get to as much anymore, but I like working on cars. But that's a capability that I have that, hey, maybe I want to go out and do that myself for a variety of reasons. Maybe it's just what I want to do on a Sunday. And we think about that in the company context. Are we good at that? Do we want to be good at that? Should we be doing that? Should we be doing that internally? Should we be doing that externally? That's a conversation at the front end, which we're not necessarily having today, which is very different from, hey, can I save $20 on a lawnmower? It's, should I even be mowing my own grass? Or even, let's fundamentally ask, should I even have grass, right? Maybe I live in Las Vegas. Maybe it's time to zero-scape the whole thing. But like, I think about that in the company context. That's true. Should we even be doing that? And I'm always impressed when I meet people, strategic leadership, CEOs, venture capital, who really understand how to solve problems. They have a bigger solution set than many others, right? They think about problems and they go, hey, have you thought about this idea over here or that idea over there? Because they can see the whole forest. And I think the ask with sourcing and procurement today, and one of the reasons I think it is sort of tragically mislabeled, is we need to see the whole forest. We need to understand, hey, is this something that we should be doing? Is it something we shouldn't be doing? Is it something somebody else should be doing for us? And that collaboration, that coordination, that is something that's quite different from your traditional, purchase rec to purchase order, et cetera, or even on the sourcing side, who should I work with? Well, this becomes quite a broader conversation. And to me, that's a big shift.
Well, and it is interesting because as you start to broaden it, even this concept of problem solving starts to change. Because you could look at problem solving and say, okay, well, I solved the problem of which lawnmower we should buy, or I solved the problem of picking a landscaper. But what you're actually saying is that much more structural. You're saying, let's think about how we as an organization make decisions. How creative do we want to get? How many different perspectives do we want to bring into the discussion? And so it really moves from being a task of procurement managing spend or managing suppliers or managing contracts to managing how do we make a decision as a company about how we're going to invest our resources, how we're going to spend our time, where we're going to focus. What are some of the process or tech or data considerations that procurement needs to be thinking about as we expand that perspective?
Yeah, and sometimes these don't have to be huge things, right? Sometimes they can be, sort of the easy button, right? It doesn't have to be this huge undertaking every time. And I'll give a really good example of this. I started in the enterprise systems space. It's still a lot of what I do today. And in the enterprise systems world, one of the challenges that you face in procurement is sort of, software flying at you without knowing that it's coming, right? And this happens, right? And it happens on a regular basis. And partly it's because of the way, in many companies, the way that the purchase rec to PO process is set up. Mm-hmm. And it's that buying the lawnmower. They know they want something. They haven't really checked necessarily whether or not we already have it. And they're out there, sort of buying. And a lot of times that happens too late in the process. The check happens too late in the process, that review and approval step. So one of the things that you can do is pretty simply, and I know a lot of colleagues and other people have done this out there, right? This has happened, but it's trying to push that upstream a little bit. Say, hey, what's that intake process look like? What's that form out there that everybody's using in order to create that purchase rec? Where before we get into Coupa and Ariba and all the other P2P systems, how are we intaking that demand and what do I do with that information? Where does that go? This is a very tactical conversation around your request and approval steps and, sort of forms and logic, but you can really change how the business works. And I'll give an example. Back in my Moderna days, when I was running enterprise systems, we put a little check-in that said, is software required? And it'd be yes. And it was like, okay, it was in ServiceNow at the time, but I think there's better options for that now. And I said, okay, let's take a look at this and say, let's have a conversation before this purchase happens. And then that team gets to become a strategic partner to the business, saying, how can I help you figure out this problem? Rather than, if that purchase order already went out, then you're roadblock, right? Or even if you're in the PR to PO process, you're viewed as a roadblock. You're like, oh, well, I mean, they're not approving it right now. And it's so frustrating. I can't buy the stuff that I want, because at that point, you're now blocking something that's already in flight. It's a bit of a sort of a very nuanced difference in a way, but it's very different to come up at the front end of the process, sort of total quality type approach, rather than that kind of QC model of like, hey, I'm going to check that it's broken after it's already at the end of the production line. It's a very different model, and it can really start to change how procurement and sourcing operates within the business, going from being that tactical, transactional, roadblock to being strategic, value-added partner, right? And that's the big shift that has to happen.
And if we know that we already have this pre-existing issue with being mislabeled, misperceived, misunderstood, we need to be exceptionally sensitive to anything that even looks like friction or administrative delays or inconvenience, because it's going to reinforce the very notion that we're trying to repair. You mentioned value just now, and I think this is another one of those interesting concepts that goes along the lines of the sort of broadening perspective. We might traditionally think about managing multiple tiers into a supply chain. And you're challenging that as well, saying, no, we need to think in terms of value chain, not just supply chain. So just to level set before we get into this further, what is it that you mean internally when you talk about the importance of value chain with regards to procurement?
Yeah, and this is where you start to get into sort of the blended world of procurement, sourcing, corp dev, and some really interesting things happen when you start to look across sort of this value chain optimization model. Let me take an example. I've worked a lot in the CDMO space.
Sure.
I've done a lot of work with CDMOs, worked at a CDMO. So let me take that example. Most large pharma companies, generally speaking, do their own manufacturing, but have some element of CDMO capacity utilization, sometimes for clinical, sometimes for excess demand, sometimes for legacy demand, depends on the scenario. Right. And we're all kind of used to this, right? There's a lot of CapEx in the industry. And actually, there's a lot of inefficiency in our industry in life sciences because of 95% gross margin. Because if you're operating on 95% gross margin, you don't have the same pressure, right? What's the main pressure on us? Normally regulatory, right? Like that's the biggest risk is more about, not getting anything wrong. If you think about something like a fab, if you're TSMC or someone like that, you're running on a 2% gross margin.
Yeah.
That's a very different conversation around optimization and what are we good at and where do we spend our money? Because we've had those high gross margins in life sciences, that hasn't been sort of the thing we focus on, but it needs to be going forward. It needs to be something we're better at. There's a lot of inefficiency in the industry, a lot that we can do from a procurement and sourcing perspective. So let's think about, the ups and downs of demand and whether or not we do something internally or externally. Traditionally, because we weren't very sort of flexible when it came to integration, data management, vendor management, orchestration, sourcing, all of those tools were very rigid. We used to make these big, or still to this day really, make these big cuts. Hey, we're not going to do manufacturing. Right, we're just not going to do it. We're going to entirely outsource, to one, Catalent, Lonza, whoever it is. We're going to entirely outsource, or we're going to do manufacturing in-house. We're going to do it all in-house. It's all going to happen in-house. Well, those are really rigid binary decisions. When you look forward, that is not how a company is going to operate. It's not how really well-run company, the big guys, you think the Apples, the Microsofts, that's not how they operate. They don't operate along these very rigid, inflexible lines. They operate in a much more flexible, fluid environment. How do you achieve a flexible, fluid environment? Sourcing and procurement has to be tightly integrated with the business, and the tools and the processes have to be tightly integrated with multiple vendors in order to bring in capacity and in match demand and supply in a much more real-time, granular way, almost even down at like that order level. Very different than the traditional, hey, we're going to make this sort of 5-year decision that we're not going to do this, or we're only going to do this, right? That's a very rigid, very inflexible. And if you think about this in sort of mathematical terms, almost by definition, you're going to create inefficiency by making that kind of big, rigid decision. But why did we do it? Why did we pick one preferred? Why did we say, hey, we're going to do everything with this one vendor, or we're going to do it all in-house? Process issues, people issues, SOPs, policies, all of that gets wrapped up in how do we do our work in life sciences makes it very hard to be flexible. But when you look forward, flexibility across the value chain is exactly what we're going to need to do. We're going to have to really change how we think about sort of how we build a company. It's going to be quite different. And think, look to tech, look to some other industries that they said, I brought up fabs already. I think they're already quite sort of ahead in many ways. There's going to be some interesting analogs out there in terms of how do we rethink how we run our company, and how does procurement and sourcing play a key part of that?
And I know we're trying to escape sort of the narrow traditional definition of procurement as the sourcing arm of a company. But if we think just for a moment so that we can sort of explore this flexibility idea, I think about, okay, where in the sourcing process that most of us are familiar with, do we get those flexibility opportunities? So it's certainly in requirements definition, right? As you're interacting with the business to figure out what's needed. It's in supplier discovery and qualification. It's in certainly collecting bid data and information about the different providers, negotiating, putting those contracts in place. Is there a place to start if you're trying to increase your flexibility, or is it about taking each opportunity as it comes and stopping and saying to yourself, to the team, okay, where are we being rigid? Because we know we're doing it. So let's go seek out that rigidity and find a way to correct for it. Are there specific decision points? Is there low-hanging fruit of rigidity, I guess, is a way to ask the question.
Yeah, I think absolutely is the answer. And let me give a couple examples. So I actually recently joined Science Exchange. I've worked in procure to pay for quite a while, both on the tech side and the ops side. Recently joined Science Exchange. And one of the reasons that got me really excited about joining was that Science Exchange, we handled data. And it's actually a really interesting conversation around what is procurement and sourcing, including from a technology perspective, and what does that mean in terms of orchestration and managing vendor relationships? So here, as an example within life sciences, tons of data flowing back and forth. Yeah. And when we know this, we know it's historically, I have literally been, on many occasions, FedEx DVDs, thumb drives, portable hard drives, right? That's traditional life sciences data management. I would get a hard drive in the mail. And you think about how incredibly inflexible that is. And there's a lot that goes along with that. How do we decide the data format? How do we understand, how do we work with this vendor? So what do we do sometimes? Well, we're only going to work with one CRO because they're the ones who have the data model that we use. Think about that. Think about how rigid that is. We've just decided, hey, we're going to single source ourselves to only one provider who's then going to be in charge of the cost model because we can't move to anyone else because of the data. It's like, oh, that's incredibly rigid. And one of the things that, so Science Exchange does, it brings data in across multiple vendors. That's the kind of thing that really changes the game. It's like, okay, well, now I could use, why do I need that preferred relationship? I mean, yeah, there's multiple other reasons that go into that. There's big sort of strategic conversations that happen. But when we think about how we get to those decisions, who are we going to use? That's often around things like, well, how do we actually work with them? And what I find interesting is that how do we actually work with them is typically left out of the procurement sourcing conversation, right? Because it's like, that's not actually part of our job. Yeah. And actually, even if you look at any procure to pay process flow diagram, it's actually one of my favorite things to point out. There's this step that's called like create purchase order. And then there's an arrow and there's another box and it says receive invoice. And we're like, in between this box and this box, and there's this little arrow. That arrow is the entire project. Like that, the entire, everything we did with that vendor. Everything we did with that vendor, people, data, services, goods, all of it. Yeah. That is this tiny little arrow. And we think about that and we say, oh, wait a second. Maybe I need to be a little involved in that little arrow. Like what's actually happening there? And we sort of nibble around the edges, service accruals and things like that. Was the work
Mm,
performed? That's still kind of in the financial world, and that's probably more tied to things like month-end close and the controller. But there's more we can do there. There's more we can do there to say, wait a sec, we as procurement, we as sourcing, we probably need to be involved in like, how is this going? How are we bringing in the
yeah,
information, the people, the goods? And that is a very different conversation again. So where's that flexibility starting from? I think it's sort of self-defined. And even in some cases, it's actually literally defined by things like bonus structure, right? Like how are we paid in
yeah,
procurement and sourcing? How do we make our money? And this isn't people being irrational. If you say, hey, your structure, and you see this all the time in sales teams, but I think it's known to us, but not necessarily that well known broadly, that there's sort of a cost saving comp element in a lot of procurement, especially in sourcing. And it's like, well, okay, is that the right model? And I'm not saying a wholesale, let's change the whole comp model
sure,
with housing, but let's think about what is our real job? Like, what's our real job there? Is it cost savings, and against what, and in what context? Or is it really, and again, I sort of bring this up in the, I come from a technology background. IT used to be a cost center. IT was like,
yeah,
our job was to deliver laptops at the cheapest price point. Like, and I'm joking, I'm making light of it,
yeah,
but it kind of was, right? It kind of was like, provide the things that are required at the lowest possible cost. Whereas when you think about digital and IT and technology today, it's like, I want you to change how my company runs, right? That's the
yeah,
new mandate for digital. And I think that that's also the conversation we need to have in procurement and sourcing. Not, hey, can we save money and build some strategic relationships? But hey, how do we run the business going forward? Like literally, how do we run the business? Should I be doing this in house? Should that
yeah,
be a CMO, a CRO, outsourced R&D? Should we be trying to run these assays in house? Are we good at it? What does it cost us? What would it cost us to do it externally? Right? These are really good conversations that are extremely difficult sometimes to figure out. There's a lot of data that goes into them, a lot
yeah,
of process, people conversations. But I think that's the future, right? I think that's the future. And again, I'd point to companies like Amazon and Apple who have done an extremely good job with this and have literally turned into multi-trillion-dollar companies because of it. I mean, under the hood,
yeah,
what they're really good at is process and a lot of outsourcing, and a lot of orchestration with suppliers and complex, supply chains. But there's a fundamental decision. It's not just that like they were good at managing their supply chain. They made a lot of internal decisions around
yeah.
whether we should do this in-house or not that led to that incredible value generation. And I think that's the takeaway, not just, hey, we're great at managing that supply chain.
Well, and I think to bring it back to our theme of mislabeling procurement, we've sort of addressed, what do you do if you know you have a problem? There's a perception issue and it's limiting the impact procurement can have. The other way to come at this is to say, what is the image? What is the value proposition that we want to project? And how do we go out and start actively investing in that? I don't have a marketing background, but I've had enough contact with excellent marketers to know the science and the thought and the effort that goes into figuring out and defining personas. Who are the different people that we're talking to? What do they need to hear? What's top of mind for them? Should procurement start on this projection, this proactive effort by trying to maybe learn a little bit more about the end customer internally that we're attempting to work with so that we're approaching them in a way that's going to address some of these mislabeling issues?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think we just need to be blunt about it as well. There's a perception issue around procurement and sourcing in life sciences today, right?
Yeah,
The perception is roadblock. That's the perception a lot of the time. And it depends on who you are in the company and where you sit, but certainly with teams like R&D and clinical, a lot of the time the perception is procurement and sourcing are groups that make it harder for me to get my job done. And that's something that we need to change. So there's two big frameworks here that I'd love to sort of bring up that have worked for me in the
sure.
past, and I think it is something that we need to really work on. Like we need to work on like how we see ourselves. We need to work on how do we fit inside the business. So one is this kind of lighthouse project concept. Find something that's broken, fix it, and highlight it. Find a
Yeah,
very specific thing, a very tactical thing that we can fix and solve that problem and create a champion in the business. And I think that's really important. I think it's really important to say, hey, let's start to build some champions, because then we'll say, all right, let's show where we're adding value to these transactions. Let's show how we're really changing how this business works and improving, making life easier for a lot of people out there. And the other thing that I add is, this is a lot around, around process and sort of our perception of our role. And it comes back a lot to sort of how do we make people do things? One way I always like to say is, I've never received an SOP from Amazon. They've never sent me an SOP. I've never had to read and understand a training document.
Yeah.
I've never been through any kind of training to use Amazon. And I think we forget, and when we are internal to companies, we kind of rely too heavily on the stick. We're like, look, if you don't take this training, we won't give you access, or some other punishment will duly come your way. And that's a problem. It's a problem because, look, every functional team, every SG&A team, we are all asking things of these people who are getting their jobs done every day. And their jobs aren't the things that we're asking of them. Yeah. And if we think about this inside our companies, life sciences, biotech, biopharma, a lot of them are really critical roles to the company. Clinical teams, project managers, R&D leads, ops leadership. And yet we're saying, hey, you actually need to go through this really arcane process. I mean, and let's point out, okay, I'll take procure to pay. Sometimes that's relatively efficient, but let's take something like creating a new contract, or heaven forbid, creating a new vendor, where a new vendor request, which they need a CDA and an MSA and a PO. If anyone can say, hey, we've really nailed that, it's incredibly efficient at my company and it's fully integrated, awesome. I'd love to see your process flow diagram. I love those things. And let's get into it. But I think that we need to think about, like, where do we fit in, and how do we get these people on our side? And these people are really our customers. They're our internal customers. And in another way, like, that's the Amazon example to me again, is I think we need to think a little bit more like public web, right? Public web, we don't get to hammer somebody over the head with an SOP, right? We have to think about UI, UX. We have to think about a great user experience. And for a lot of people, they're going to interact with us, not at the leadership level. I'm not necessarily talking about the VPs and people like that who are thinking, strategic sourcing and which partner do we want to use. I'm really thinking along the lines of, like, the rank and file and everybody getting their job done every day. And how do we interact with them, and how do we give them the right tools that they're excited to work with procurement, or they're excited, or they think it made their life easier that we brought in some kind of new tool or new capability. That's a very different model than we've traditionally taken in procurement and sourcing.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the other things, and this is a great way to continue this idea of sort of trying to get into our internal customers' minds. When we think about success, procurement thinks about spend, we think about savings, we think about risk, we might think about beneficial contract terms, and all of those things are important. But I think in a lot of cases, to your point about the tasks that we're asking others to do not being a core part of their job, they're thinking in terms of time. How long is it going to take me to get into this system and do this task that I need to do? Then how long is the delay that follows me going through this process to me getting what I wanted on the other side? If we try to get our speed up, if we try to approach something closer to real time, how might that change not only the way procurement approaches process and tech and experience, but also how we think about using the data that we have access to, all of these DVDs that are coming to you in the mail? That just not seem particularly close to real time, right? Having, physical things show up in the mail. How can we accelerate our support of the business?
Yeah, absolutely. And first, I just want to address, there's a question that came up in comments. I think is a great one, which is, okay, so we're really doing two things around procurement and sourcing. One is, how do we make sure that we're, from an ops perspective, from a business perspective, we're buying the right things from the right people at the right cost, et cetera. And the other is, from a financial controls perspective, how do we make sure that we're operating in a state of control, we're meeting our SOX controls, and that we're maintaining all of the approvals, necessary delegation of authority, et cetera. And I think the answer is absolutely, we need to make sure that that's happening, but that can happen more efficiently than it sort of traditionally has done. And that the two sometimes get conflated, right? The two sometimes get conflated between, hey, I need to do this because of the financial controls, or I need to do this because of business process and operations. And there are ways that we can really improve that mechanism. I think then that gets then into the nitty gritty of sort of business process and purchase rec and POs. But there are ways to really change how we operate as procurement professionals. And I think that also leads into this question of efficiency across the enterprise and where is it that we're adding value. What I'd love to see is, okay, let's think about kind of how we buy things in our daily life, right? And we do this in sourcing already, but I think there's more that we can do, which is give people tools to make life efficient for a lot of the everyday things that they're the experts on. And then we're saying, okay, we'll move that through. Yeah, we have the financial controls, but we're moving that through very quickly. And then how do we help that, the more complex sourcing engagements where we need an RFP or RFX type platform or solution, and we need multiple bids, and what vendors do we want to work with. And then the last I'll add to sort of your comment is, there is a whole element here as well of sort of vendor relationships and vendor management, right? And that is something that when we look back historically, it's basically a historical accident. And there's a really interesting analog here, right? I started my life or my career in hedge funds. And I started in securities lending specifically, which is used for short selling, but used for other purposes as well. And there wasn't, at that time, there was no sort of transparent market for securities lending. There was a lot of, you made a phone call to your broker to try to see what kind of rate you could get or what kind of rate they would give you. Yeah. Very opaque markets. And I helped build some of the first lending indices through Reuters in that case. That gave transparency to that market. One of the things that really bothers me in procure to pay, or should I say sort of broadly B2B vendor management relationships, is we're not good at that, right? Like everything is maintained one-to-one. Everything is maintained between me and the counterparty. You think about if I walked into Home Depot, think about the SVB crisis. I walk into Home Depot and they go, you know what? We've changed our ACH info, so you're going to have to update your ACH file.
Yeah.
What?
Before you can buy this hammer. Yeah.
Yeah. Before you can buy a hammer, you're going to have to update that ACH info. I'm like, huh?
Yeah.
Because I don't know their ACH info, right? There's a credit card company in the middle, or any other form of transactional processing in the B2C world. I think one of the things that we can leverage more efficiently, it's one of the things that gets me excited about Science Exchange, it's concept of aggregation and do we really need to maintain all those vendor records ourselves? Do we want to be the ones maintaining and managing all those relationships? I think there's a lot of inefficiency there that we take a lot internally when we're on sort of the client side, when we're one of the buyers. We do a lot internally ourselves that's repetitive across the industry. And some things we have to do, right? Something we have to do our own GXP audit on, a vendor, and certainly in the GCP or GMP world. Okay, we got to do that. That's something that we have to do ourselves. But there's a lot of things that we don't have to do ourselves that we could bring in a partner and make life easier on ourselves. And I think that's another real potential for efficiency gains. And also comes back to that orchestration conversation. Who are we using and why? Well, in some cases, we're using somebody because 3 years ago, they got set up as a preferred vendor. And I'd love to say that there was a better logic to that.
Yeah.
But I've seen it where there are companies out there, consulting companies, others, their primary value prop is just having a preferred relationship. That's their primary value prop. It's not actually being extremely good at something. It's, well, actually, 4 years ago, we got in as a preferred at Merck, and that's kind of what we do. But that shouldn't be the way that we're making those decisions, right? It should be a much more, hey, let's really do a deep dive on value. Let's understand, who's the total population out there that we could source from. No, I mean, if I take back my stock market analogy, way easier. Do I need to know who I'm buying shares from? No, it doesn't really matter, right? The shares are fungible. Yeah. So, that's easier. Clearly in strategic sourcing, that's not true. There's a lot of difference between vendors. But we can take some of those lessons of hey, we can build a better model here. We can build a better model here to create greater fungibility and add value in a way that historically we've done all this work ourselves, right? We've done a ton of effort in-house. I think that really changes things.
And as we start to wrap, I actually want to go a little bit back to where we started, because we started with this sort of sense of how are things going in life science, the cost to bring a drug to market. You said basically every single drug needs to be a full Barbieheimer, right? It can't even just be Barbie. It's got to be the whole grand slam together in order to make it work. Really, what procurement needs to do inside of that paradigm is stop thinking inside of procurement and start trying to think as the company, and then trying to fit ourselves inside of that. So whether that means that we think and talk in terms of top line revenue, as well as around our efficiency and what we're able to help hit the bottom line. It sounds like a lot of the things we've discussed around time frames and process and experience starts in procurement's mindset, how we see the business, and so therefore how we understand our role within that. Are we the ones committing the major tragedy of mislabeling ourselves in terms of the way we think about our priorities and where we need to focus and how we interact with other people? Is that the first step?
Yeah. So first I want to address that sort of cost conversation, and I have a very personal story there, which I'll happily share. Interestingly for me, I now suffer from a relatively rare condition of nerve damage that came out of an autoimmune issue. The autoimmune issue itself came from working through the pandemic at Moderna, a time I'm incredibly proud of, and I'm incredibly proud of that company. But I literally don't remember a lot of 2020, and was working flat out through that time period. Again, like I feel like I'm not sad about that. It burned me out in a way that my body literally shut down, and I ended up with nerve damage. Unfortunately, after a lot of searching, sort of the best answer medicine today gave me was, here's gabapentin, a 30-year-old nerve pain blocker, and not a great answer. And there's a lot of better approaches that we could take in terms of regenerative medicine and sort of, different ways that we could tackle this. And it's extremely difficult for what I have. It's extremely difficult to bring a drug to market. And there's a couple of companies that have failed trying to do so. And there's a whole lot that goes into that. There's pieces that I'm not an expert in the slightest around, clinical and FDA and sort of the regulatory environment. But there is a piece that I can focus on and that I think we can really change, which is, why does it cost so much to bring a single drug to market? And I'm talking about that all the way from, VC-funded biotech up through the biggest pharma companies. We have an incredible degree of inefficiency in our market. And this also impacts us today in terms of funding and other sort of, how do we make sure that we are an attractive investment? And it matters across the board, right? If I think in a tech analogy, I can take 30 million and sell a company for, tens of billions, if not hundreds of billions of dollars. If I take a biotech analogy, it's going to cost me 500 million just to de-risk an asset. And we're saying, hey, it's up to 6 billion now to bring that asset to market. That's a huge amount of expense. That changes what we can do as an industry. It literally means we're leaving patients with unmet need, right? Personally, I'm now in that category and feel very passionate about this. That means that when we look at how do we change who we are as procurement and sourcing, how do we think about what the future looks like for us, we can go out and be more influential in the business. And actually saw some interesting comments on the sidebar here around, like, how do we become more influential? How do we become that sort of strategic partner to the business? And again, I actually think that the best thing we can do here is sort of restructure our own brand and come at it from, we're problem solvers. And the number one way to do that is find a problem, find a tactical, low-hanging fruit, fix it, and then show value to the business and show that we're there in order to improve the outcomes, across projects, programs, spend management, but the big picture, improve outcomes for the business. How do we change as a company? How do we improve the value of the company? And that's something, again, anyone who's on the webinar or listening to this, I'd love to chat about that. I'm a huge advocate for this, but I think that we can really change how we operate within companies and how does procurement and sourcing operate within companies, so that we can do more, right? We can do more as an industry. We can be more attractive. From this sort of external capital perspective, we can bring more value to market in terms of solving problems, unmet needs for patients. We can do more. And if we can do more, it means that, again, like there's this virtuous cycle that happens. And that's really exciting. To me, that's very exciting. And that is how I look at sort of the next 10 years of evolution in biopharma. I really hope that that's where we get to a much more efficient, scalable model. And in a large part, we're going to hopefully have procurement and sourcing at the core of that conversation.
Well, and I appreciate you sharing your personal experience with this, because I think what it brings into sharp focus is the fact that when you're speaking in life sciences, value is personal, value is human, right? And so a lot of times procurement hears value, and the first thought is, that sounds expensive. But if we can stop thinking of that as, oh, it's either value or efficiency, value or cost effectiveness, and think value in terms of what are all of the different things that can be achieved, I think that's a great step towards moving procurement away from this historically sort of siloed, process oriented, roadblock perceived group, and instead saying, no, look, if we can improve the way we think about spending money and improve the way that we make decisions as a team, given that 10 or 20-year trajectory for our product mix for our industry, look at all of the additional things we can help this company do and all of the people that we can potentially impact if we can just start today and be more agile, be more focused on that space in between, this box on the flow chart and that box on the flow chart, understanding that that space is someone's whole experience. It really does make clear just how much opportunity there is in this space specifically, although a lot of it applies in procurement teams, in all industries. You've used a lot of tech examples, any place where you really have to be innovative, where it's a fast moving market, and where the stakes are very high. It actually makes being in procurement in that role sound so much more critical and exciting. And again, that excitement, I think, is part of what can start to change the mislabeling and hopefully start to bring the tragedy to an end.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I agree. I'm excited about it, right? I think it's how do we get out there? How do we find, build close relationships with key stakeholders? Again, there's a great comment about we have to speak their language. I completely agree, right? It's really important in our industry. We need to make sure that we're meeting with them where they're at. And again, I'm going to bring up a little bit of the public web world, right? When we think about this as customers, where they get to make their own decisions, it might be worth bringing a little bit of that mentality in, right? Which is, they get to go out, and there's actually always alternatives, right? And we see this in procurement. We see challenges with things, was it a contingent labor contractor versus service provider? And, how are they actually providing that service? We want to make it efficient for them. We want to make it, value added, and we want to really be a partner to them. And that's something that, we want to bring that in and have that as managed spend, but we want to do it very efficiently. We want to do it in a way that we're both adding value to that key stakeholder, but we're also doing more internally. And you made a point a few minutes ago about data. I'll actually add that there's really two elements here that we need to make sure that we're keeping an eye on. And one is the actual data being generated as part of the project. Great, right? In life sciences, that's critical. Sometimes that falls under, GXP type regulations. Other times it's outside of it, say in the R&D world. But there's also data about the project, right? Data about the relationship. And both of those are really important to us. We need to manage the data itself that's generated as part of the project or the work, but we also need to make sure that we're really deeply understanding the data about, all of these relationships and vendors and everything else that's out there. And some of that's the financial data, some of that's sort of our classic KPIs in procure to pay. But some of it is outside of those classic KPIs. Some of it's much more about sort of how you would think about this in a marketplace type model, or understanding vendor relationships and understanding whether or not they're really delivering on the value of that project, and whether or not our key stakeholders are getting what they need. So I think that's important, right? It's important to think about our role as much more integrated into this entire environment than just, focused on that upstream element.
Yeah. And to that point, Andrew, I want to sneak in one last question, because I think this is interesting and it ties to what you were just saying from Liv. She's talking about, as procurement starts to be more expansive and think more comprehensively, we may start bumping into other teams that are not yet on that journey. And she gives the specific example of finance. We sort of need everybody in the company to be thinking in this big, expansive way, don't we? Or we're going to just hit the next roadblock ourselves as we start to think bigger picture. Any advice or experience that you've had driving this kind of change cross-functionally, starting in procurement but expanding outward?
Yeah, it's a really important topic. It's always the people, process, technology, and the people element is absolutely critical. And I think one of the things that we see a lot is, we build these hierarchical reporting relationships, and they're sort of reinforced over the years. And I come in sometimes and say, oh, wow, look, like these two departments are doing this. Why are they doing that? Well, it's usually over process issues. It's usually over who owns what, or who should be doing what, or somebody's not doing something for somebody else. And a lot of it comes back to sort of how do we work together at a very fundamental level. And I think there's a big difference if you look at companies that are really, really efficient today, and the ones that I look to as sort of examples, they follow this idea of sort of integrated service architecture, microservices architecture. So they're talking to each other constantly through data. But I will make it sort of less tech oriented and say, look, it's about this traditional hierarchy, pyramid shaped, versus the way we run projects. If you think about how we run projects, it's sort of a circle. It's a bunch of people working together, regardless of who they report to, or regardless of kind of the exact team that they're on, the cost center that they're in. It's a really different model. And yet we sort of use projects as like these one-offs, like we're going to do a project, we did it, it's done, right? But that's not, when you think about sourcing and procurement, it's never really the case. It's not like, hey, we did it. Like
it's never done.
Never done. It's continuous. Yeah. So in that way, one of the things that has worked well for me in the past is, hey, can we set up this kind of permanent project team type model, dotted line relationships? We all work together, and maybe there's a end-to-end process owner. I really like that concept of saying, somebody owns the process end to end, even if that process touches a lot of different departments, so that we don't end up in these interdepartmental conflict as much. We try to solve that process holistically. And we set up a project team that's saying, hey, we as a group are all going to work together. And yeah, we report to CFO versus CPO versus, CIO or whoever it is, but we're all going to work together on this project. And this group is critical to the success of sourcing for the company. And we're going to continue to work together. It's not like, hey, we're going to just implement one thing and then walk away. Mm-hmm. This is an ongoing conversation. And that sort of circular project-oriented team, I think, is a really important element that sits a little bit outside of your traditional sort of hierarchical reporting relationship. And that, I think, can help as well as sort of building up those success stories, building up the areas where we get those wins.
Absolutely. And if we're going to try to think as big as we're suggesting everybody think, it's going to take creative approaches like different organizational structures and communications practices and use of data in order to get it done.
A lot of communication, a lot of talking to each other and trying to show
absolutely.
There's a lot of misunderstanding out there about, what value add does sourcing and procurement bring to the table in life sciences? A lot. But sometimes that perception isn't there. And so I think that there's a lot of communication that we can build up to better share our story and then better build up, what the future looks like.
Absolutely. Ander, thank you so much for your time and sharing not only your professional expertise, but also your personal story in this area. I appreciate you being with us.
Great. Thank you so much. Really, really great to be here today.
And I also want to thank everybody who's joined us live, who's participated in the conversation via the chat, and anybody who is listening or watching on demand later on. We appreciate you joining us for these events, and the Art of Procurement team has a bunch of other live events coming up. So don't forget to check out the calendar page on our site, artofprocurement.com/calendar. On behalf of my team and the team at Science Exchange, thank you for spending a bit of time with us. Hope everyone has a great rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.